At one point this year, there were 17 farms up for sale on a single 30-mile stretch of road along the A75 in southwest Scotland. Now, you could argue that this is just a coincidence, or it's localised to one small corner of southwest Scotland, but it doesn't feel like that at the minute. Everyone in the industry will know that a farm sale isn't just a transaction or a simple exchange of money for land. It is so much more. There are generations of hard work, of memories, of emotions, and of course of legacy that are all tied up within the land. Despite all this, many are still deciding to sell up, and they've had enough. But why? Farms always have and always will change hands, but it is the forces and dynamics behind these sales that is changing quickest of all. Gut feel's one thing, but if you really want to understand, then you've got to look at the data, and there's a very contrasting picture. In Scotland, there was nearly 50% more land up for sale in 2022 than from the previous year, and this is 30% up on a 5-year average, although these numbers are slightly skewed because of COVID. In England, however, the picture really couldn't be more different. The amount of land brought to market in the first half of 2023 was at its lowest point for nearly 20 years. And it's not surprising that in a game of supply and demand, land prices in England have reached record highs. But even in Scotland though, where supply was up, prices are still rising. Now that to me is a sign that change is very much in the air. And to understand these changes, you first need to follow the money and look at who's buying land these days. Back in the day, it used to just be a bunch of farmers that would come forward in the event of a farm sale. Those looking to expand their business or maybe park a little bit of extra cash. But over the last 10 years, that has changed considerably. Largely down to climate change. No longer is it just farmers that are in the market for more land, but there is now significant interest from a whole range of different investors, wealth funds, private and public companies. With there now being legally binding carbon emission targets for companies here in the UK, many of these companies are scrambling to find ways in which to reduce or offset their emissions. Land's ability to sequester carbon is causing many private and public companies to enter the market. With land being seen as a more secure investment, many private investors are also entering the market in times of economic uncertainty. But what about the people who have decided to sell? The farmers, the people on the ground, many for which farming is the only thing that they've ever known. The decision to sell is probably one of the biggest decisions any farmer will ever have to make, if at all. But more and more are deciding that they've had enough and that they're getting out. The last 2 or 3 years have been unprecedented in farming. A global pandemic followed by the war in Ukraine, coupled with 3 prime ministers in just about as many months, all on the backdrop of the UK having left the EU and the removal of farm subsidies. It'd be an understatement to say that the changes in farming have been seismic. And with change comes uncertainty. The trouble with farming these days is that whilst you're sitting on a huge asset, the returns from that asset are getting less and less, and farmers are having to work harder just to stand still. As the current farming population gets older, many are beginning to consider whether the whole thing's worthwhile. And the amount of land coming to market is a good gauge of that sentiment. But there's also a silent killer here that's really driving the final nail into the coffin for many farmers. And that is a lack of succession. Low returns for increased work with a lot of industry uncertainty means that the next generation just aren't coming through, which leaves the current owner in a very difficult position. And this is the dilemma for many landowners and farmers up and down the country. Whilst you can see that they're wealthy on paper, that wealth doesn't translate into a feeling of being better off. In fact, many are feeling poorer each and every day. And more are seeing the last option to sell up as the only option. So what can you do? Land always has and always will continue to change hands. Farms come and go. For some, it might be their only options, and for others, the decision might be out with their control. But for those of you who have a choice, my advice, for what it's worth, would be don't sell unless you really, absolutely, 100% positively have to. And even then, try not to. Because once you sell, it's not coming back. I firmly believe that land will continue to be a great investment. But what's important now is that farmers and landowners adapt and change as we move into a new era of farming. Don't give up, but do adapt and change, because the opportunities are out there. And if you want to find out a little bit more about some of those opportunities, then you can go and watch this video here.